Hello and welcome to the Platinum Pride, a very special edition where the New Indian Express celebrates India at 75. We're using this series to look back at what we've achieved and to look forward. And in policy today, India abroad, a new world order. We have two esteemed experts in this area. They've worked together before, as we just discussed in the PMO of Rajiv Gandhi. There's G Parthasarathy to Myanmar, Australia, Pakistan, Cyprus. There's Meera Shankar, who's been ambassador to the US. And as I said, they both work together at a very critical time, I think, in India's history in the PMO, when we were changing the way we were looking at the US and China. So really, and we have Mr. Chawla here, the first journalism as the first draft of history. He's witnessed all this. He knows both of them very well, editorial director. So I'd like to take this opportunity to ask the first question to Mr. Parthasarathy. And then if Ambassador Shankar could come in here. How do we really define this new world order, in this post-pandemic world with a more assertive China and America that seems somewhat unsure of itself, and a pretty divided Europe, this new world order, and where really is India's place in it?
I think that if you look on the 80s and 90s, I think we'll have to acknowledge it has been the decade of the Chinese for their remarkable economic growth, which is really, I would say,
of keeping its head low and building up its own strength. Now it feels its moment has come. And so Xi Jinping is asserting Chinese nationalism across the Asian continent, particularly with countries with which it shares land and maritime borders, which are not fully defined. So for India, it is a difficult moment. You know, you have a Russia, on whom we used to rely, the former Soviet Union, which has shifted closer to China. You have a China which has tied up with Pakistan for its energy security and access to the Gulf. And you have an America which is trying to now compete with China, which and may also have left it a bit too late. But for India, then the choices become fairly difficult, because we need a country to counterbalance China in Asia, since we don't want Asia to be dominated by any one country. The only country capable of doing that is the US. So we have moved closer to the US. Because of our convergence in terms of keeping China in balance in Asia. But at the same time, India wants to retain some autonomy of decision-making. It doesn't want to be, called a US poodle, if I may say so. So it needs to keep open its relationship with Russia, and it needs to build relations with other regional powers which have a slightly independent stance. Some may be allies of America, but others, such as France, are allies and yet independent. So it's a fairly complex world which India has to navigate. Our ability to do so will really depend to a great extent, as Partha said, on how we handle our economy, how we develop our potential, and also, I think, on the extent to which we have cohesion at home.
Right. May I bring in Mr. Parthasarathy here again and talk about, this new move towards smaller multilateral groups? We've seen the rise, we had seen BRICS earlier, we've now seen the rise of Quad, and India seems to be experimenting with these groups. Of course, it tried SAARC, but we all know that was a failure. So do you see this as one of the ways in which we can counter China, as Ambassador Shankar said?
Yes, I would say that it certainly dilutes Chinese power. If you notice, The Russians treat us in defense matters equal to China. They're giving this S-400 missiles to us and China almost together. And therefore, there is that balancing act. And Russia, I think, if you take it historically, for someone who's lived there, they don't trust the Chinese. They look at them as the successors of Genghis Khan. I mean, that is very deep in their roots. And I was just going back, I was in Moscow during 71. In many ways, they helped us because they even deployed forces on the borders with China. They sent a submarine to the Indian Ocean as a gesture. So therefore, we have to balance between the Russians and the Americans because as I see it, China is seeking hegemony in Asia.
Yeah.
It's a hegemonical power.
Right.
And I don't think the Russians have that thing. But if you see on Afghanistan today, the one sort of meeting we are organized of some importance was the meeting with the Central Asian countries, in which Russia was invited because Russia still has a stake in dealing with that. And therefore, in Afghanistan, which is somewhat always parallel to ours, because we have the same interests as Central Asia. So I think on our neighborhood, Russia remains important. On the larger issue of balancing China, the US remains important. But you have to remember that there's a strong lobby within the US to sort of expand trade, build the relationship with China. So it has to be, as Meera says, a balancing act with these three. And I would at the same time urge that the dialogue with China continues, which we have always done, because even China may find it inconvenient to be at odds ends with India on everything. I don't see that just now when Xi Jinping is asserting himself, and he's really more of a hegemon than we have known of earlier Chinese leaders, especially Deng Xiaoping. And Meera and I were there together in Beijing when the Prime Minister met Deng Xiaoping for the first time.
Right.
And I think, if I remember correct, perhaps Prabhu was also with us on that.
Yeah.
So I think we are well placed, but in an ultimate analysis, we will have to grow at 7 or 8% if we are to remain relevant, even with powers like ASEAN.
Right.
Well, Kaveree, we put it in perspective again, because since we are discussing 75 years of independence.
Yeah.
I would like both the diplomats who have been quite senior and joined the services in early 70s or early, late 60s, and they have gone through various phases of various prime ministers. I would like to say, if we have to discuss the new world power in terms of from Nehru to Modi, and there was in the beginning also, Nehru was also world player, so was Mrs. Gandhi for some time. And various things happened because Russia, India, Chini, Bhai Bhai, then Russia, Hindi, Bhai Bhai, all sorts of slogans were raised at that time. At that time, strategic relations were more important than economic relations. So I would request both of them to say how it has developed over the world order in terms of India in the middle of it, and America, Russia, China in 75 years. As Meera was saying, we have undefined border with China. We have, of course, defined border with America because there's no border there. But we have also undefined relationship with both of them. Generally, for 40 years, I don't know what is our relationship with America, what is our relationship with China in terms of strategy, in terms of economics. And when Modi had come back, we saw him in the first term, he also became the darling of the entire world. The people who were shunning him at that time, I remember his visa was cancelled by the interview, and the same High Commissioner was begging to meet him after the was declared. So I just want to know how this diplomacy or world order has evolved vis-a-vis India during the 75 years. So the prism various prime ministers, 3, 4 prime ministers, more important, others don't matter. I covered 11 or 12 prime ministers, but others don't matter. Only people who matter as prime minister who had some impact on diplomacy, from Jawaharlal Nehru to Modi, and Rajiv. Rajiv been there for 5 years, I covered, and with him also. He was a charmer, but he was accepted as a leader. But what is the difference? What is the world? If you place India in the middle and all these 3 countries, Russia, China, and America, how things have changed?
There are some elements of continuity in the policy that we have seen from all prime ministers. I think Nehru was an idealist and the, what could I call it? The conceptualizer of India's place in the world. Indira Gandhi brought a sense of greater realpolitik to the use of foreign policy. And I think, for instance, 71 was certainly helped by the fact that we had had the Green Revolution, were no longer dependent on ship-to-mouth food grain shipments. And the fact that we had concluded the Indo-Soviet Treaty of Peace and Friendship as a counterbalancer to both potential moves by China and the US. Then you see under Narasimha Rao, because of the shift in the global order with the collapse of the Soviet Union, an effort to reach out more in a more sustainable fashion to the US, again carrying on what Mrs. Gandhi in her term after the post-emergency term and Rajiv had started, but in a more sustained and systematic way with the government of Bill Clinton. Then you see that being carried forward by Atal Bihari Vajpayee. And now you see Prime Minister Manmohan Singh having got one of the core issues which bedevil the relationship out of the way with the India-US nuclear deal, and the Prime Minister Modi having moved substantially closer to the US. So I see an element of continuity. There may be acceleration in this relationship, but there's been a certain logic to the change in our relationship with the US. For instance, you were asking about the economy. Post 91, actually, the US has emerged as our largest trading partner in goods and services, if we take both. China is our largest trading partner in goods, but the nature of the trade with the two is very different. The US has a slight trade deficit with us. We have a small trade surplus, but varies between $20 to $20 billion, $25 billion. The Indian IT and high-tech sectors have actually evolved on the back of linkages with the US. So the entire new sectors in the Indian economy, which have provided dynamism to the economy, have emerged as a result of the linkages with the US. Today, we are exporting more than $100 billion worth of software, and 60 to 70% of this goes to the US. We are trying to diversify. Europe is now increasingly a market, Asia less so, but still, it's a major economic partner for India, which has propelled some of the high-tech sectors of the Indian economy. If you look at India's trade with China, it's been problematic. Till 2002, trade was minimal. Then it has grown substantially because we have also eased up areas of investment for China and also eased up some of the trade restrictions. And today in goods, China is our largest trading partner, but the deficit with China that India has keeps growing. And it has led, if I may say so, to the deindustrialization of India's small and medium sector in particular, which have not been able to compete with Chinese goods. For instance, Aligarh used to be known for locks. Where are Aligarh locks today? Firozabad used to be known for glass, bangles as well as glassware. Nowhere on the scene. Similarly, you will see lots of Higgs thermometers, which used to be made in India. Now you don't get a thermometer made in India. There's a whole range of small scale and medium industries which have been eviscerated as a result of the linkage with China. So I would say the economic linkage with the US has been of immense benefit to India. The economic linkage with China has provided cheap consumer goods to the middle class, but had damaging impact on the Indian economy. And it is after the reforms of 91 as the size of the Indian economy has grown, as the potential of the Indian middle class has become globally, something to factor in to business strategies, that more attention has been paid to India. And the third factor, I would say, which has led to this, is the fact that India decided to exercise its nuclear option. Again, a policy on which there was considerable continuity over various regimes. Jawaharlal Nehru kept India's nuclear option open, set up the Atomic Energy Commission. Indira Gandhi had the peaceful nuclear explosion. Rajiv Gandhi looked at weaponization, or giving the go-ahead for weaponization of our nuclear program. And Atal Bihari Vajpayee did away with the, concealed nature of our nuclear program by actually testing. And since then, India is now reckoned as one of the powers with nuclear weapons. So the exercise of the nuclear weapons option, the reforms of 91, the growth of the Indian economy and its potential, even though it hasn't lived up to its full potential as yet, I think these are the factors which have really propelled the world's assessment of India in a different light to the way in which it saw India post-independence, which was as a developing country, which had a lot of development challenges, was very poor, whether it would be able to handle its complexities and diversities was always a question mark. And, there were innumerable articles,
Right.
After Nehru, who will India break up, so and so forth, and never a word about Pakistan, but it was Pakistan which broke up.
Yeah, and we helped in that.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, Partha.
Well, I'll go to what Prabhu wants to hear. What do I regard? When we've sort of skipped over it, he asked about Mr. Modi. And I'll give you a surprise on what I think is his greatest achievement. His greatest achievement is an excellent relationship with all the Islamic countries in the world. It's strange,
Except
but
Pakistan.
except Pakistan. Pakistan is a class apart. But that is a national consensus. It's a class apart. But look, a person at the same time has transcended the Arab-Persian rivalry, which is Iran and the Gulf countries. He has personally good relations with the Iranians and with the Arab world, especially with the monarchs in our immediate neighborhood. And that for us is much more crucial than what Egypt or Sudan does. It's the Gulf Arab countries. In fact, I look forward, if we manage properly, to much greater involvement of the Arab Gulf countries in investing in India, because the main source, the regular customer for the petroleum is India. And this is going to be a feature of it. You would be surprised with Iran. This has continued through governments. In dealing with Afghanistan and in containing the Taliban, who's our greatest friend? It's Iran.
Right.
It is through Iran which we operated earlier on when having to deal with the Taliban before the Americans came in. It is Iran which now is important. So in the balance of power, all this is taking place because the Arabs, with our good relations with Israel, there was a lot of ideological objection in India. The Palestinians first, so and so last. Mr. Modi set all that aside. And you have at the same time an extremely good relationship with the Arabs, an extremely good relationship with Iran. It was as good as it has ever been. Iranians are very difficult to deal with, I can assure you. But it's remained, and it's equally good with Israel. And it is also, I would think, indirectly leading to this process of greater recognition of Israel by in the Arab world. Diplomatic relations are expanding in the Arab world. So I think his contribution has been substantially on this. if you ask me. He has a good relationship with Sheikh Hasina. Every Indian Prime Minister has done that. Sri Lanka, things have been steadily improving, or even during Dr. Manmohan Singh's time, but it has been carried forward. So as I go back to what Meera says, Indian foreign policy, irrespective of governments, there is continuity and change. Change according to situation when the world is changing. Continuity in sense of a civilizational link with these countries which we have maintained. So I can't think of any other country which shares such good relations with both the Iranians, with the Arabs, and with Israel.
Right.
That I think, and really, I must say, I watched this from within government. A hesitation to go and deal with Israel. You know what is going to be its political impact here, there, everywhere. No such questioning. Israel is Israel. Israel is the partner. The Arabs are also moving with them, and it's time we move with them. There is this past shyness to, acknowledge that we have relations with Israel. We've gotten over that. And importantly,
Partha Narasimha Rao started it.
He started it, but
he opened it up.
He had the political problem at home of people within his cabinet, I know, saying, what is he doing? It won't go down well with people. It's not happened. Indian people are sensible.
Yeah, Partha, I think the big shift is that, the Arab Gulf states in particular, and even countries like Egypt, see Iran as their principal rival. And in that, they see a confluence of interests with Israel. So the animosity or antagonism which characterized the Arab interaction with Israel has, in a sense, faded gradually over time. And most of that rivalry is now focused on Iran. So that created a space for India to actually do this balancing in a more sustained way. I think what Prime Minister Modi has done is he is the first head of state, head of government to have visited Israel from India. We've had other visits and other interactions, and you're right, it was Narasimha Rao who opened up the relationship with Israel. But I think this is the stance that Prime Minister Modi has taken, where he has gone on a visit. The balancing between Iran and Saudi Arabia is the other major, balancing act that he has managed in the Gulf, because we did have reasonable relations with Iran earlier, and we did have some good relations with some of the Gulf states. But because they were dependent on Pakistan for their security and had security pacts with Pakistan, there was always a certain tension in the relationship. And I think there, Mr. Modi has reached out to Saudi Arabia, reached out to UAE, and these countries have really shifted in their approach to India, which I think has helped India on a number of issues, including, some of our domestic issues, and also the economy, because you're seeing more investment flow in from these countries.
If I'm right or wrong, you can correct me. I think both of you are making more emphasis, trying more emphasis on economics of diplomacy rather now. It is more economics which is determining now what kind of global world order we will have, world order, global order, what you want to call it. But and we are talking about Arab countries and whatnot. It can be, as a journalist, I look at it different kind of, it's a community war, basically. Mr. Modi suits him to have a Shia nation on this side, Shia versus the Sunnis, because the rest of the world is Sunni, the Arab world. And therefore, Iranians are mostly Shia. That is one particular way of thinking. I remember Chandrasekhar, there was some problem at that time. Something was to happen and some airlift was allowed or not. Partha will recall that. At that time, it created a lot of problems because it was Iran involved in that. So, yes, you are absolutely right. Modi has been able to win both Iran as well as Saudi more because of economics and also because of Shia Muslim problem which are there. What is the new world order we are discussing now? Because we started from Nehru.
This is the new world order.
This is a new world. Where I'm coming back to that. Israel has become so important because Israel is now no more untouchable, and it plays an important role in the new world order. Therefore, our foreign minister, I've seen first time, Mr. Dr. Shankar spending 6 days in Israel. I've never seen a foreign minister of any country spending 6 days in Israel, meeting every Chaplasi and minister whoever was available to him. What he did in Singapore, also doing the same thing. Because this reflects how important is Israel, where foreign minister spent 6 days. I don't second, third visit he made there. And Prime Minister, as she rightly pointed out, our Prime Minister was the first head of the state to visit Israel. So do you think in the new world order, India is going to play Israel as some kind of a force or some kind of a, whatever you want, can handle to balance the Middle East policy?
No, I think really the Middle East policy is balancing itself with a large number of countries behind Israel rather than going with the Iranians. So the split between the, making this a split between Islam and other religions, that's over. It is more, the Iranian-Arab rivalry is civilizational. It emerged even when they adopted Islam. Their practices were different. So when the Shia order emerged in Iraq. So I think as far as India is concerned, we have not allowed domestic politics to come in the way of building on this relationship. Whether it was Israel, whether it was Iran, whether it was Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has been a very difficult relationship, and I think Meera has said it very well. There was a security dimension brought in. And I mean, let's be real. Balancing India with Pakistan for them is not any good any longer. And in fact, if you look at the way the UAE, which is our largest sort of supplier of remittances of police and of petrol and so on, it's the UAE which called Pakistan to order. And then thereafter, this Saudis and others have followed suit. Yes, they will keep in touch with Iran, with Pakistan. It is an Islamic country with a disciplined military force, but India is looked at separately in terms of a larger balance in that region. And right now also they will experience problems with the Turks, which is happening. So I think we have played the Islamic world order well. We are, Turkey is a country it's very difficult to have good relations with. And very frankly, I think we should put the Turks in their place with much closer relations with Cyprus and Greece. Because the Iranian Turks have a sense of their own history, which is not relevant, I think, in this day and age. So we within this, what I call, or what is now called as the Indo-Pacific region, India has fared well, very well. But again, I go back to the basic point. If you want content in your relationship, then the economy has to grow and an industrial base has to come up in this country. As Meera noted, I mean, it's pathetic that, to be honest with you, you think we can't get the toys which are made elsewhere and reproduce them here? Yeah. Our kids play with toys which are imported. I mean, we've reached really that stage.
Right.
So
Kaveree, just a minute.
Prabhu, I will just agree with you that yes, it is the economy and technology, actually mastery of technology, which is going to drive dominance in the 21st century world. And therefore you see the competition between the US and China to some extent is geopolitical, but also to some extent it is technological. Who will dominate the 5G technology? Who will dominate artificial intelligence? Who will dominate robotics? You know, there are a whole range of new emerging technologies, and anybody who can write the rules for that in a way in which it tilts it in their favor, or can gather people to use that technology because they are seen as more friendly, will actually have global dominance. And I think that is where India falls short. We have not kept pace economically. Our economy has been really in a very slow state right since 2014, before the pandemic as well. And it's only now beginning to come up to pre-pandemic levels. But, say we were actually to achieve our goal of being a $5 trillion economy, well, it puts us in a different league. We then become something like the third largest economy, not only in PPP terms, but also in actual terms. And that makes a whole heap of difference to what you can do globally, to how you are perceived, to what the weight of your market is. And the second area is for us to develop our own technologies. I think I just heard, I was very happy to hear that big companies are now plunging in to the renewable sector, including green hydrogen. They think that that is going to be a technology of the future. Both Reliance and Adani have said that they are going to do this. Other companies are trying to build 5G, but a lot of it is based on, really buying out technology from elsewhere. And then, so strengthening our own R&D base is critical. And here our companies have been very slow. I think Tatas were the only ones who got so many patents for the cars that they built. But most of the rest that we produce is really based on technologies which we buy out. And so each cycle means we are behind the curve. So strengthening R&D base is very important.
I will just stop you because we're deviating into different world of fact, technology. A lot of technology is good for India or bad for India. That's a different thing. But technology has not reduced the expenditure on defense all over the world. Because technology, more you become technologically superior, you have to buy superior planes, you have to buy superior everything else. So technology is basically meant to help this. As a journalist, as an active person, I can think more helping the rich rather than the poor. And disparity between poor and the rich during the 10 years has gone up after technology became the driving force behind the whole thing. Because now 1% of the people in global India, they own 88% of the assets. And 30 years ago, they owned only less than 60% of the assets. So there's a technology because that produced Google and Zuckerberg, 33-year-old person becoming worth about $1 trillion. So that's a different issue. We should not get into it. But I'm coming back to the world order, where I'm just raising because we are going to conclude it. India, with the kind of relationship we have with our neighbors now, in 75 years, I think has changed in that respect. Partha has been in the neighbors with these places as well. With America, Mrs. Gandhi, you know how she dealt with America at that time. So when we are coming to that economics, yes, we are there. We are important. But we are third largest. We can become a 5 trillion economy if your inflation rate goes to 20%. You don't have to do anything else. GDP will become 5 trillion if you raise the inflation rate as is happening now. So it has to be in real GDP. $5 trillion has to be on static prices, on stable prices rather than on.
Of course.
So that is what's it. So what I want to know, how you think India in the world or where the neighbors are still not with you. All of you are looking at you with suspicious eyes, or they expect more money from. Like China is distributing money to everybody else. So economics is becoming important. You will buy neighbors or you will win neighbors. That is the question we have to, because if the neighbors are not with us and rest of the people we are dealing on equal basis, like Trump wanted motorcycle duty to be reduced. That kind of level we have come down to. So in that new changing world order where economics, taxation policy, like you refer to China, because of allowing Chinese to send their goods and services here and killing our own small sector. Then that sector, what is going to be the next 21st century? Is going to be a war on economics between everybody dominating the markets or dominating the geographical expansionism which China is involved.
It involves both, Prabhu. It involves both. It's not single. You can't separate one from the other. Let me put it very plainly. For the first time now, I've been associated with defense research. My brother has been a scientist on missiles. For the first year, we are actually seeing, first time, we are actually seeing defense technology coming up in India. Now, you have to create a right atmosphere for that. And I am afraid we have not done it thus far. I think it is coming about now. innovation is something which the present government is putting a lot of experience. But in today's world, unless you have the economy growing, your people reasonably satisfied and prosperous, the economic growth reaching down to everybody, and finally, you move ahead on technology. Everything we have to buy. We have not allowed our own scientists to develop this, and we have to conduct our foreign policy in a way, as we have been seeing, technology now coming in, American firms shifting, create conditions here in India, economically and politically, for that to happen.
I would agree with Partha. You know, it's both. You can focus on the economy and should, because that's the core. You know, your economic capacity will determine actually what you are able to do globally. But at the same time, if you ignore your deterrent capability militarily, then you invite aggression against you. So you need to be able to balance both interests, keeping the economy going and at the same time handling your defense in a manner which is sufficient to deter adversaries from taking adventurous action against you, and building whatever diplomatic alliances you need for that globally, particularly in this phase where the power gap between you and China is quite large and is going to take time to transition to a better balance. You need to create external balancers. And then you need to try and procure for India the resources that we need for our development. For instance, lithium. If we are going to go into electric cars or hydrogen, you will need lithium. And China has cornered most of the lithium resources of the world. So keeping an eye out for the economic resources that we need and for developing markets for our goods beyond just being a market ourselves, I think is going to be very, very important. Both are going to be critical.
In conclusion, if I may ask Mr. Chawla, really one question that bedevils India all the time, the Pakistan question and the Kashmir question, where does that stand in this new era?
You're asking me?
No, I'm asking...
yeah, will it be solved in 21st century or not?
Yes. Will we finally see a solution to it?
Will there be a Pakistan as part of the world order or not at the moment?
Yeah. The two ambassadors, yes.
Well, let me put it as someone who's lived 5.5 years in Pakistan.
Yes.
There is a schizophrenic element to this as far as Pakistan is concerned. It can see, I'm talking of the establishment, and let me be very clear, I draw a very clear line between people and the establishment.
Right.
I think the person who recognized that early on was Mrs. Gandhi, though the Pakistanis were more scared than respected her because of Bangladesh. And the important thing was we were able to turn things around when we started developing this. And the person who built on what she did most was Mr. Vajpayee. He made his mistakes, yes, he was over trusting, but the path was clear. We don't even have, the Pakistanis don't know where we live or how we live. That's the reality. And the hostility to us is largely in the Punjab province.
Right.
Because the military comes from there. So I think we have, at a certain stage in time, moved towards it. I think Mr. Modi gave it a hard try to take over from where his predecessor Manmohan Singh had left over. Dr. Manmohan Singh went ahead, in fact, including in Kashmir, but had to fall back because that's the way the Pakistani system works. But if you have a greater system of exchanges, some of which are unilateral. I'll tell you, in Karachi, the Muhajir, who were the refugees who went after partition, changed for a simple reason. They were fed with propaganda that their Muslim brethren in India were dying, starving.
Right.
And when they came here and found them living in 20-story buildings, the reality, there's no better check than reality.
Right.
And many things we had worked out in Mr. Vajpayee's visit for this. And Mr. Vajpayee was a great proponent of this. Aane do logon ko, let them come. Right. India is not going to fall apart.
Right.
And it was taking shape, and then Kargil, various things happened, and the government changed. But we have to learn to understand their weaknesses. Their weaknesses is one of that is the Pakistani Punjabi militarism. You have to understand that part of the problem and then move ahead, because yes, we're going to have a cash problem for a long.
I think there are some structural issues within Pakistan which also drive the India-Pakistan rivalry, and that is the army dominance of the polity in Pakistan, which is dependent on projecting the threat from India.
Yeah.
You know, they apportion to themselves such a large amount of resources, even when the country is sinking economically. They dominate all sectors, from farms to industry to running the electricity system. And if you go to Islamabad, you will see actually their generals all have 1,000 square yard plots, huge bungalows, huge farms allotted to them. You know, the Indian bureaucracy lives in a far more modest way. But all these privileges, the army is loath to give up. And for that, it needs to keep this tension with India alive. So to some extent, we have to live with it, but we can see what we can do to keep channels of communication open, because I think the worst is if we have no channels of communication and you have, you know, two nuclear armed adversaries slipping into inadvertent exchanges. I think that would be bad. And, you know, see what you can do without hype to try to move the relationship forward. I think that's the best you can do. It's the excessive hype each time that we, you know, get caught into, which then also encourages a backlash from sections in the Pakistani establishment, security establishment, which are loath to see this movement. So I think a little more realism, but at the same time, an openness should be there, and firmness in dealing with that.
What about the takeover of Taliban in Afghanistan? How does that change things as well?
Means that we have a very fluid situation to the west of us, with Pakistan as an adversary and the Taliban having created a certain chaotic situation in Afghanistan, going back to the kind of Islamic rule, which everybody expected they might have moderated and moved on from. But in terms of what they are doing, they haven't, though they have reached out to India, and we're seeing that we have agreed to give humanitarian aid to Pakistan, to Afghanistan, food aid, and that Pakistan has agreed to provide us transit at the request of Afghanistan, not at the request of India, which they have made clear. So the Taliban too would like to have some room for maneuver vis-a-vis Pakistan. I'm sure that many of them are nationalists and ideologues also, but at the same time, they would like to create space for themselves. So if you see, they want to go ahead with using Chabahar in Iran because it gives them options vis-a-vis Pakistan. There will be, because, you know, a nation's geographical situation also determines what its policies are going to be. And to that extent, I think Afghanistan would be loath to be completely dependent on Pakistan. Having said that, of course, it's an entirely new situation and we have to wait and watch how it develops.
Kaveree,
I'd just like to add one thing to what Meera has said.
Yeah.
I have been there on 5 occasions to Afghanistan and seen virtually the whole country. Listen, after our very imaginative aid program, it's the best aid program we have. Everything Indian is liked. We built them dams, we gave midday meals for their school kids, hundreds of them coming and getting educated here. And therefore, India has this image. And I found this when I visited some shops in Kabul. I got Pashmina shawls at a price I could never get in Kashmir. It's as good as that. So I think, as Meera says, let this take its own course.
Right.
Do what you have been doing, which is to give them assistance which touches their people.
Right.
And the port does, because it makes the imports easier. Most important, keep up your assistance in a manner which they want, which we can get done there, and you will always remain the good guy.
Right.
And let me tell you one more thing: Pakistan is having problems with its own Pashtuns.
Right.
And it's real problems now are going to arise northwards in the Pakhtunkhwa province and in bordering areas of Afghanistan. So it is a complex issue, and I think we're handling it reasonably well, because there are a lot of people now who've spent long times in Afghanistan. In 5 visits, I really picked up this, and I think the economic interaction by which we transfer education and other facilities to them and do what they want. I mean, this 50,000 tons is just a beginning. In our godowns, we have much more which goes waste often. So I think that is something we can provide. I would not necessarily do it through Pakistan. I would get the UN Food Organization to do it through Chabahar and through Iran. I don't want our assistance to get linked with Pakistan.
Right. Wonderful. Mr. Chawla, any last questions? Any last thoughts?
I just want to say that as they were talking about continuity, diplomacy, because the diplomats have also spoken the same language. Because on Pakistan and on Afghanistan, they have spoken the same language they have been speaking for many more years. So the things have not changed. What is guiding Pakistan and Afghanistan and Iran is basically Islamic fundamentalism. But I would say that in the New World Order, if I can hear them, from Nehru to Modi, the two irritants, China and Pakistan, has not faded, as she has been using this word more oftenly. Meera has used faded a couple of times. So I would say, even after 75 years, the two irritants are still not fading away, and they will continue to affect the world order vis-a-vis India. That's what my feeling is.
Thank you.
We have to give it a try to change that.
Yes.
Yeah, that we have been trying for 75 years through defense. Only defense is the only option left now.
Thank you so much, ambassadors. Thank you so much, Mr. Chawla. It was a real masterclass in, foreign policy. It was thoroughly enjoyable. Thank you so much.